Okay, well, welcome to T2X commentary. This is the commentary for Mission 6, A Question of Knowledge, our big Hammerite mission, actually the only one in the game. I just wanted to mention that these quotes that we're seeing here at the over the top of the briefing artwork, a lot more difficult to actually produce those than you would think. We had a variety of people working on them almost from the very beginning, and ended up with Valletta and Toolhead and myself kind of refining those. And they must have gone through, some of them 10 drafts, but a lot of them probably, upwards of 15, 16, maybe even 20 revisions, just trying to tweak them and get the words right. We didn't want them to be pretentious. We wanted them to be cool. We wanted them to, remind of the original missions, and that real unique, just the way that they kind of set the tone for the mission. We tried to be real careful about what words we used, and to split it up and not just not have all mechanist quotes or all pagan quotes, but to really have a variety in there. And that was a lot. That was something I thought would go really quick, and almost up to the very end, we were still tweaking those stupid things, trying to get them exactly to say exactly what we wanted them to.
Yeah, and that was rough too, because we not only had the quotes, but we had individual backgrounds for each of the different factions in the game. We had like the Hammerite background, pagans, keepers, the Amara stuff, which is Zaya's religion, and the Mechanist stuff too. So the cutscene team, those guys, Saturnine and Haas and Caffeinated Zombie, had to basically create little miniature cutscenes for each one of those individual snippets, and so eventually we got to see them all.
Yeah, we'll probably talk about those guys a little more later when we get to some of the cutscenes.
Yeah, when we get to the next cutscene, we can do that.
But, so yeah, this is the only Hammerite mission.
Yeah, we wanted a big, impressive Hammerite mission, because the Hammerites, even though we only have one themed mission for them, they're a very important fictional force in the campaign, and a lot of people really enjoyed the Hammerite missions from Thief 1, so they're some of everybody's favorite characters.
Yeah. And we've obviously been inside a Hammerite cathedral in the I can't remember the name of the mission now. In the original one, we're undercover.
The haunted cathedral, and an undercover. Yeah.
Undercover. Well, yeah, you've seen the cathedral, obviously, that's in ruins at that point and haunted and all that. But then and then the one in undercover. But we wanted to do something grander, and to show also that the Hammerites they were here in Sunnyport, that there was a threat to the smugglers if they were found out, and that these guys were big enough and powerful enough to to really bring some punishment when they discovered the smugglers operating there. And this is exactly what Zay was looking for, is who's tougher and bigger than the smugglers that I can utilize to bring these guys down.
Yeah, so, these guys are very old school. Right. We wanted to communicate not only that these guys were the religious fanatics that you've seen in Thief 1 and a little bit in Thief 2, but these guys are really follow their traditions seriously. They have a gigantic cathedral. They're pretty much the most powerful force that's in town here, and they rule more or less with an iron fist.
Right. And I think we even have some street confrontations and stuff between them and some of the citizens in the next. Not the next mission, but
mission after in Mission 8. Yeah. And so we also updated their look to make sure that they looked appropriately menacing and badass in here.
Yeah.
Before we kept the same theme of going with the red clothes here, but we gave them chainmail to make them look a little tougher. We gave them like big nasty hammers. We modified those a little bit. Just played with the colors a little bit to be a little less cartoony, a little darker and more menacing. Right. And we wanted them to be pretty scary.
And I like this. We're getting to see it's winter time in Sunnyport. We've got the snow, which was kind of a nice. We got a little bit of that in Mission 4 with the train.
Yeah,
we get off at Sunnyport, but here we. Now that's something I've always enjoyed about there's been some fan missions that have employed the snow, and I've just always thought that was cool. So it was nice to see it here, and it gives everything kind of a nice, bright. Even though it's nighttime, you still get the impression here Sunnyport is a happy, shiny town.
Yeah, colorful town. Yeah, that's interesting. That's another one of those plot requirements that was really a hassle for the mission design team, because we wanted to have a transition from being very snowy and wintry to being in a location where all the snow melted. And so you see Sunnyport in different stages. We had to create multiple snow textures for all these different maps. So when you first come in the train mission in Mission 4, there's snow coming down and fog, and everything is really covered in snow. And now you have here like some light snow. And the next time you see the cathedral in Mission 8, all the snow will be melted, and it'll look kind of normal.
Yeah. And you guys loved us for that.
Oh yeah. Well, the artists more than anything. I think all the Sunnyport textures were done by Adink. That was actually one of the first sets of textures that we did was the Sunnyport textures, and that was again a learning experience, because we felt at the very start that Sunnyport needed to feel very rustic and have these kind of brown, like and orange hues, and we just found that there wasn't enough contrast, pretty much, and it was just bad direction on my part. And we ended up eventually revising them to have a more complete texture set, so we had all these nice different colors, and we still made it feel vibrant, but not too monochromatic.
Well, and the main thing, we just, I don't know how much detail, I can't remember how much detail we gave you guys. I just knew that we definitely were convinced that we needed a place that looked pretty radically different from the city, because we've played so many fan missions in the city and so on, and just to get away from it for a little while, which requires different textures, different architecture. The streets are a little wider here in Sunnyport, to accommodate the tourist trade and everybody coming to see the big, wealthy cathedral and all that kind of stuff. So, and that's a funny thing again about a community project. When you're doing a single fan mission, the guy that's designing the mission usually writes the plot and writes, he's kind of the master of his own fate in terms of the complexity of the thing, and he's not going to write anything into the plot that he knows he can't pull off in the design, and we were too dumb to figure that out. So we had all these plot people that really none of us were level designers. We're sitting around coming up with a story, and then we email it across. Hey, here's what we came up with in plot means. We mail it across to Dave and his team. And, sometimes they would just come back and go, are you crazy? I mean, there's no way that we can possibly do this. And most of the time they surprised us and said, hey, we can do this, but we have to modify it in this way or make some changes.
These caveats.
But it's just the nature of a community thing. You shoot for the moon, and we just really didn't set a lot of limitations as far as the story and the locations and all that. We tried to write it just what we would want to play and see, and then they had to come back and tell us what was
feasible,
realistic and what wasn't, because we didn't know. I mean, none of us had ever really messed with drama ed or done any of that. So
it's very different working on a community project, and then different again, of course, when you go pro, and there's a whole different team dynamic there and different requirements there. But it was very much a learning process. But I thought we could talk a little bit about the recruitment process for fan mission authors here. This is this original map was built by Robin G., who built a couple maps for the Thief community. He built Lady Whitman's Disease and Saturio Returns Home. And he was really just a fantastic architect. He was one of the guys that I wanted to get right away. And there's a lot of what I would call like really talented authors from the Thief community, but I was looking for some very particular traits when we were trying to recruit people for T2X. And I'd never done it before. I didn't really have any professional experience at that point, but I kind of went with my instinct. My instinct was really not to get guys who are super ambitious or who are kind of prima donnas, but guys who are really solid builders, who may not have built the most ambitious missions in the world, but who are really, really solid architects, who had a good sense of aesthetics and gameplay, and who could build cleanly. And I think Robin G. really exemplified that in many ways. Like, his missions didn't have tons and tons of scripting or story, but they were just dynamite architecturally, and they were very cleanly built. And I thought, because we had other departments, we had our plot department, our graphics department, they could fill in those gaps. They were the ones responsible for story and for coming up with good events to put in the maps. As long as the building was clean and the game and the base core sneaking gameplay was good, that we could fit those other elements in. And I think that really turned out to be right for the authors that we recruited.
Right. Well, I remember early on, there were several of us that were anxious to get Robin, because I think he had Saturio Returns had just come out.
Yeah.
Or Circus Trio Comes Home, had just come out not a couple of months prior and got really good ratings, from the community, and had the 10 gold hammers or whatever it was, and one of my all-time favorite fan missions, the Soturio fan mission. So when he agreed to do it, I was really, really excited about that.
Mm-hmm.
Now we did Valletta and I did a lot of the documentation for this mission together. Had a little bit of fun with Gil the cook and all that stuff later on, which we can talk about when we get there. But
here we go. We got concealment potions for the first time. There was a power-up in Thief 2 that was unique to Thief 2, which was an invisibility potion, and that basically made you completely undetectable, and you could run amok and blackjack whoever you want. And we felt it was a little overpowered. We thought we could have a similar power-up, but maybe do something a little bit different with it. And what we ended up doing that we liked was having a potion that concealed your footsteps completely, and that only gave you a very slight bonus to visibility. So it was pretty powerful, but it had a slightly more limited applicability. You really had to think about where you were going to use it. And the only thing that I didn't like about our implementation really was the fact that it was difficult to communicate those specific gameplay ideas to the player, because I think they stumble on it here and then it's available in the store later. And the title Concealment Potion doesn't really effectively convey all that detail. We probably would have had a better time calling it like a silencing potion or something like that. But
how many times have you died climbing out of that bell tower? Just out of curiosity.
A couple.
Have you plummeted to a hideous death?
Yeah,
so many times. But I love the cathedral, just the grandness of the whole thing. We really just kind of told him to go crazy and just build the most imposing, just a really intimidating kind of cathedral that represents, so that the player really gets the idea that, man, the hammers are not to be messed with in Sunnyport.
Yeah, he makes a really fantastic use of space. He's able to use a finite number of polygons, really, like without going overboard, but completely fill the space up to provide a lot of interesting buildings, like around the cathedral, and a lot of interesting detail inside without going too overboard. It just feels spatially correct. The proportions are really fantastic. It's one of the things that stood out about his missions. And I think even just in terms of pacing, like the outside, there are buildings that you can explore on the outside, like you saw earlier in the playthrough, little houses and little buildings to explore, but it doesn't really detract from the grandness of the cathedral or the focus of the cathedral. He was able to implement that really well. And actually, it's like a lot of our fan mission authors. He actually disappeared at one point in the project. Right. He disappeared when this map was about what I would say to the 50% mark. He disappeared when all the geometry was more or less in, probably about 90 to 95% of the geometry was in, but before we really had textures and lighting and really only rough gameplay. So this is another map that actually I took over near the end of the project and ended up spending a couple months on getting it to a final state.
With especially the interior design, I remember changed pretty radically.
And just a couple
not
spots.
The design. I'm sorry, the texturing and stuff.
Yeah,
not
the
design,
overall aesthetic. Yeah, right. Because at the very beginning, before we had art resources, there were just some texture families that were so lacking that they really couldn't do anything except for to apply like the default white, checkered texture everywhere. So he actually imported some Thief 1 like really super low res textures to just put it in there and get a rough look before we had our final textures that were done by John P. and Dink.
He turned this in really quickly, didn't he? Seems like I remember this being
pretty fast.
We were amazed at how quick it was available. This and Hotel were two that came in really quick.
And that's another thing that you can kind of sense in playing fan missions is how efficient people are, I think, in building. And Robin G. and guys like Robin G. and Twin Dreamer and Duncan are really very efficient in the way that they build. And I think that's much better than getting the ambitious fan mission authors who maybe have a lot of great ideas but maybe take too long to build spaces,
I think another thing you find too, though, in some of these missions that were maybe turned in a little earlier, like for instance this one, there's a whole, we've got the thing with Cavador, and there's I think two other subplots that are going on where there's some poisoning going on and different things, and a lot of that is because we actually had a build of the mission early enough that we could play through it and go, you know what, there's nothing going on in this space over here. Let's put a character over here or put a book here that refers to blah blah blah, and kind of just tickled our imaginations a little bit when we could actually be in the space and walk around in it, as opposed to some of the stuff that came in later at the end of the project, where it felt kind of rushed and you just didn't want to add anything else. You just wanted to get it done. But we had some time to really let these breathe a little bit. That came in early.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely invaluable to have people who can build very quickly, and this turned out for the better because of it. And, at the end, when I took over the map and was starting to add, real gameplay and aesthetic polish on here, that came, it was time-consuming. It was very time-consuming, but it came fairly easily because the foundation was really so solid. Geometry-wise, the main aesthetic tweak was adding in the smooth curves, so there's arches and vaults that, are the 16 or 20-sided cylinders that look really good. And the whole new texture set by the artist, and getting a kind of a moody lighting theme, with kind of a nice contrast between the oranges and blues, which you see everywhere now.
And you were going to talk about too that there were some guys that were, I don't want to say celebrities, but they were big names, in the community, in the fan mission community, that had already done some things, that everybody really liked. And we tried to get as many of those guys as we could, but some of them just couldn't. Yeah,
unfortunately, there were so many projects that a lot of people had prior commitments. We got Gon Chong, who did the brothel map, which I'm really happy about. Everybody was really glad he was on board, and we got Mad God, which people were happy about, and Robin G, which people were happy about. And then Twin Dreamer and Duncan were also just fantastic designers, but had only built like one fan mission, so people didn't know him quite as well. And then we tried to get the famous guys from the community early on. We tried to get Parra, and we tried to get Marcus and Kung Fu Gecko and a couple other guys, and people just had other commitments, So we
I hounded Kung Fu Gecko probably for about 3 months. I think he blocked me eventually in his email because I said, please, I really wanted him.
That's the irony, and we ended up being the project that was finished. So, our strategy of hiring, efficient builders, I think worked out, really well.
Right. Well, and I think you talk about some of the guys that did the initial build, but then kind of disappeared when it was 50% done. And in a way, it was a lot of work for you and Duncan, I think, at the end. But in a way, it allowed us to have a little bit of cohesion between the missions, because you guys ended up ultimately finishing out the texturing and some of the furniture and things like that. And it lended itself to a consistency that maybe wouldn't have been there otherwise. It made it feel like a campaign rather than 13 disjointed fan missions to me.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Although, of course, it would have been nice if some of those guys would have stuck around. But on the other hand, if people stick around for 2 or 3 years, how much more can you really expect out of people? This was a long project.
Yeah, most of those guys probably had lives, unlike the two of us.
Unlike us, yeah. Even now, as we sit here and do this commentary.
Right. But, but it was, it was just interesting to see how some of the stuff would come back, especially after you'd spent so long in plot chats trying to flesh out ideas. And sometimes it was hard to come up with specifics, and the designers always did. This, for instance, when you get down here, this kitchen, and we didn't even imagine like a locker room, and I think there's a little bathing pool at one point, and some of that stuff. We didn't obviously specify that the cathedral would have these particular rooms in them, but it really was nice to see some of these vague ideas that we had really come alive, and how the different designers interpreted what we gave them, and I hope that's part of what really makes it truly a community project is that we didn't micromanage the
all the individual
designers and rooms and all that, but the designers had some freedom to and I think especially you mentioned Gon Chong when you play the brothel mission of Ill Repute, his personality comes through in that, and you can really you can tell this is the guy that did the docks missions and some of these others. There's a familiarity to him in that sense as well. You're just knocking everybody out, man. No ghosting for you. You're just
this is kind of an important room in here. This is where you hear about one of the first subplots in the mission, which is the fact that the cook is trying to poison Bishop Cavador, the high priest here, at the behest of a lesser bishop, Bishop Onum. And so again, this is another map where we've felt that having internal strife and conflict among the members was just made it more interesting and lended a lot of depth to the characters.
Right. Well, anytime you can hide dead bodies in rooms, you come into a room later, the guy that ends up getting poisoned is the quartermaster.
Yeah.
The poor quartermaster didn't do anything to hurt anybody, when he's laying there dead in the room. And, again, it's something else about the thief world that, Garrett, because of his sneaking around and everything, and now also Zaya, they're privy to information that really no one else has the full story, but they, your main character does, because they're sneaking around and reading everybody's mail and reading everybody's diaries, and
that's one of the things that I think is most satisfying about voyeurism is not looking in on these perfect lives of happy people, but it's looking in on really this horrible backstabbing and misery. That's one of the things. Like I tried to push for a little bit more on Thief 3, but was like catching people in just like bad plots or doing things that they shouldn't be doing, because I think that's just inherently interesting.
Yeah. Well, and definitely within the Hammerite Order, we want to see as much corruption and as much underhanded backstabbing and lying and cheating as we can, because we hate these guys. We love to hate them.
Yeah, and ironically, in some ways, it's worse than the smugglers. What they're doing is they're trying to kill each other,
right,
without letting anybody on.
Yeah. Well, and of course, and us having the players having played Thief 2, hopefully, before they play this, know that who Cavador goes on to become. That he is part of this threat that Garrett has to deal with, and part of
one of the later Thief 2 maps,
right, and
nice
the death of Victoria. I mean, you can't trace all it directly to Cavador, but he definitely is part of that whole series of events that takes place at the end of Thief 2, and the Cetus Amicus and that whole thing. So, that's another thing that's going on with the plot, is that we know who Cavador is, and we know the Hammerites are not good guys, and we don't want him to triumph, but for Zaya, this is all she, this is the best recourse that she has to get the smugglers, kind of fight evil with evil. But she doesn't really realize, I think, just how much we, the player, hate these guys.
Yeah. But we love to hate them.
We love to hate them, yeah. But,
so this is a really huge map. One of the things we did to help the player navigate around these spaces was we gave them an auto map system, and this worked a little bit differently in Thief and Thief 2. In the original Thief game, you were given kind of a two-dimensional rough sketch of each level that you were in, and it really wasn't very helpful at the time. It was kind of just like a little fictional aside that they made up. In Thief 3, we kind of did the same thing, but in Thief 2, you had these really elaborate, detailed maps that showed you like every little area of the space that you were exploring, and we actually wanted to do kind of a combination of those two. We didn't want to give the player too much information, because the players would be referring to their meta screen, to their map screen too often, and not exploring the space or really playing the game enough. They'd look on their map too often, and we didn't want to do what Thief 1 did, which was not give enough information, because then that'd be confusing in these big maps. So what we ended up doing was having an auto map system where you start out with a really rough outline of the map that you have. And then as you explore from room to room, that map will fill in. So by the time you've explored the whole place, then you have a really detailed map. But when you start out, you might not necessarily know where you're going. You just know kind of the rough layout of the place. And that seemed to work for us. That was a little bit of a pain to set up, but we managed to pull it off. I think it worked out pretty well.
Right. And, I think who else did? Somebody else work on map? I did a lot of the maps, but wasn't there somebody else that did?
I think you actually did all the paper sketches, and then I'm the guy who took those and cut them up in Photoshop and made them technically work within the game.
I was thinking that's one of those things that when I started in working on this, I had no intention of being involved much with the plot at all. I was going to kind of be the secretary, and help coordinate communication and all that. And I ended up doing some voice acting, and maps was one of the things that we just, you get to that point where it's the graphics team is just overwhelmed with everything that they have to do, and you hate to add something else to them. So, is there anybody else that can draw? Is there anybody else that can even draw stick figures, that could maybe do these maps? So, you give it a shot, and it's, they're not the greatest maps in the world, but, it worked, for what we needed.
Yeah, unfortunately, Fraps doesn't allow us to show any of the metagame stuff There's some really great art in there that was done by a Dink. He redid all the menus, the title screen, the map screen, the objective screen. There's a lot of great fictional tie-ins there. It looks very pagan-y, and we can't show those, unfortunately. But trust us, you do have a map, and you do have some cool-looking objective screens in there.
Well, I think we're getting close to Cavador's office here. Pretty soon, and that was something I wanted to mention too. Is I can't remember who the idea originated with, but we really wanted to try to tie in. Maybe not a major. Again, we were trying to stay away from major characters in this expansion because we did not yet know exactly where Thief 3 was going. We all kind of assumed it was going to be the Keepers, but for all we know, they're going to resurrect the Trickster, or Karis is going to, his twin brother is going to come back. I mean, who knew what they were going to do? So we felt like Cavador was safe because he was kind of a minor character. And we just said, maybe this guy's a recent convert to Mechanism. He was a Hammerite that defected, and we can kind of show that struggle here through some texts in his office and his diary, where he's going to meet with Karis, and he's finding out about the Mechanist and some of the frustration he was feeling with the Hammerites, and it was we felt like a fairly safe thing to do, that Thief 3 wasn't going to come along and pick up the story of Cavador or anything like that, and it just allowed us a nice tie into Thief 2 and kind of showing his progression, how he ended up being in charge of the Cetus Amicus project and all of that. So, and
again, it kind of places us in the timeline. It kind of reminds the player exactly where they are in relation to the Thief games.
Definitely,
when you have these events that tie in like that.
Yeah. And, and he was a fairly vanilla character, too. I mean, you didn't really talk to him or know much about him, so he was an easy character to kind of put a story on, to write a backstory for, because he didn't really have one. You just knew him as a name in the game, the guy that you had to go knock out, in Precious Cargo.
Yep.
But anyway, well, it wasn't Precious Cargo. What was the name of the mission?
Kidnap.
Kidnap, yes. Cetus
very
Amicus
difficult mission.
Precious Cargo. Very difficult mission,
yes.
But, it was just an opportunity to do that. And Onum, we spent, again, Valletta spent, a lot of time. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how the conflict was going to work between these two guys, that Onum was plotting to kill Cavador, and that
and he suspected his treachery.
He suspected he's going to send him to get this orb that is wanted. And obviously, the Hammerites in the city want the orb because they're losing power. That was another thing we were trying to kind of show her. And I don't think we were as successful at this as maybe we could have been, but we really wanted to show that the Hammerites were losing power. That was the reason for them, for the city Hammerites to ask these guys here in Sunnyport to go get this orb, that it would give them some kind of power to defeat the Mechanist threat and all of that. But it was just an opportunity to send Onum, for Cavador to kind of dispatch and dispose of Onum.
Yeah, one of his rivals, by sending him to a mausoleum with an impossible task of retrieving an ancient artifact.
Right. And Cavador himself not real anxious to give the city order of the Hammerites any more power than they already have, because he's already starting to have Mechanist leaning. So it was perfect setup for Cavador, and of course gave us an excuse to have a zombie mission.
Yeah, exactly.
So
we're just exploring the last of the mission here. This is a really huge map. Robin G put in tons of different themed rooms, like everything that you could possibly imagine. It's a little bit light on the machinery aspect. I remember when I got onto Thief 3, the writers and Randy were always very adamant about making sure that there was enough machinery. But again, here I think this was early. This was before that, and this is where we wanted to draw a contrast with the Mechanist. Where we wanted the Mechanists to be the ones who are really very machine heavy and very very dependent on big steampunk technology, and the Hammerites were the more traditional guys who relied on pipes and valves and crude kind of smelting machines. So you only see like a little bit of a hint of that here and there.
That was a nice little tease that Duncan does there. Again, we're talking about sections that were imported or whatever, but that little glance into the compound that we'll see in a later mission.
Yeah, and again, that's something that we did for consistency and to make the world seem more alive, was to have spaces that you could see in one map and then you wouldn't be able to get to them in another. So there's the space in the very back of the cathedral, which was the priest compound, where all the the hoity-toity priest lived back there, which was off limits to all the regular hammers, all the regular adepts, and you end up going back there in that compound in Mission 8, which is 2 missions down the line. And Duncan was originally supposed to build that. He was actually away at university at the time, so Robin G actually ended up building that geometry in there as well. So Robin G really did most of the actual layout and most of the actual brushwork in here. And I did about maybe 5 or 10% at the end, and then the aesthetic polish.
Right. And here, this is another section right here. Riding this elevator up, you've got this archer that's standing here, kind of blocking the way to Cavador's office. And of course, the easy thing to do is just to take him out or whatever. But if there is a way to ghost this. If you can get around. There's a certain angle where the shadow falls on the floor, and it's a very, very difficult thing to do, but it can be done. Again, it's one of the things we checked in beta testing is, this seemed, and because there were things like this in the original missions where it just seemed impossible to ghost it. And then of course you had people like Litha and some of these, that just figured out workarounds. And so, the workarounds for T2X are not quite as bizarre as some of the stuff that you see like on Litha's website, or maybe what Thumper, if any of you've seen Thumper's Strange and Unusual Guide, they have some really creative ways to get around dealing damage. And ours are not quite as bizarre as that, but there's some of them that they're quite time consuming. But if you want to do it, you can.
Yeah, I think we wanted to be a little better about openly supporting all different play styles, including the no damage. I mean, I think most casual players are really the average player is going to go through and knock a lot of people out and occasionally get caught and fight, But for that small contingent of really hardcore players, it's nice to support that as well.
Well, I think it's also a replayability issue. If you played it where you go through and knock everybody. I mean, I'd kind of quit playing the game and then, messing around on the website at TTLG, started reading about this. What is this ghosting, And then to me, it was like playing a whole new game again when you try to do it in that way. So you want to.
Well, that's the thing too. That's one of the reasons why we didn't really want to set too many objectives for the player. Like especially, we didn't want to rely too heavily on no-kill objectives, except where they were fictionally appropriate. It's because we wanted players to be able to set objectives for themselves, and if they wanted to kill or attack guys, that would be fine. If they wanted to ghost, that would also be fine. We didn't want to be quite as restrictive as Thief and Thief 2 were.
Yeah, especially toward the end of Thief 2.
Yeah.
But, now, where are we here? Are we going into the library here?
We're going into Cavador's office here.
Cavador's office, okay. I was mistaken. That was not his office earlier.
We were right outside, and now we've circled all the way back, I think, here.
So, here we're reading, the text and all this where he's basically confessing his frustration with the Hammerites. And again, this wasn't a major thing. We didn't want to get into the whole split of the Mechanists and the Hammerites, but, it was...
We wanted to give you a personal glimpse.
Yeah, just
guy.
What was going on with this guy, and obviously a lot of the Hammerites were feeling this at the time because there seemed to be this huge defection to the Mechanist order, which is how they became as strong as they did. Which Zaya is oblivious to all of that, really. But
the player might be interested.
Yeah, a little thing for the player there, just to flesh it out, and it gives a little more dimension to Cavador as a character, and like you say, reminds us where we are chronologically.
Yeah, so the most important thing gameplay-wise was really to get the player into the office. And so we did basically a basic key hunt where you want to get down to the library eventually and get complete your objectives down there. But ultimately we wanted to force the player to really explore the space and to get into Cavador's office first.
Right.
And hopefully they'll steal a lot of stuff along the way and read some fiction. But
yeah. Well, and speaking of the library, because I'll mention it here because the mission ends pretty quickly once you've gotten down to the library. But that was another character that, again, I did a lot of the minor characters and stuff in this, and the guy that's down there, the keeper of the tomes or whatever, it's Arafax is his name.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to have him come across as just this real nutcase, that just rambled and was, heard voices and all this. And because one of the things I really enjoyed in Thief Gold, Song of the Caverns, was the opera singer there at the beginning when you're in the caves. That just this guy's bananas, and so we wanted something similar to that, but it was real difficult to figure out how to how to do that. Was he going to be hostile? Was he not going to be hostile? There's some issues, but we gave him a little speech where he's rambling and that kind of thing. But again, he's another character that I wish I had taken a little more time to flesh out and have maybe something else, some other text or readable in the office that was a little more about him, so he'd be a little more memorable. But there's time restraints and.
Yeah, but he was still pretty good. And voiced by New Horizon, I might add, who did a couple of voices for us. Right. Very first voice he did for us was actually one of the Hammers, and he did a great job. He's a fantastic Hammerite, and then because he was able to record cleanly and act well, we used him for a guard. And then at the very end of the project, we were still lacking a Hammer, so... there were no voice actors that were available that hadn't already done like 2 or 3 voices, so he actually did 2 Hammers. 2 of the Hammers are voiced by the same guy. I don't think you can tell. And then the third Hammer was Paul Fox, who was one of our other sound guys.
It was just interesting over the course of the years of doing this, the way it worked with the community, where you had guys at the beginning that really did a lot of work and then disappeared, and then right toward the end, it felt like we were dying for a while there because we didn't have enough people. But then there was kind of almost like guys that started to step up that hadn't been involved with the project at all previously that just, showed up and did quite a bit of work, like say New Horizon, really helped us with the audio stuff at the end.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we were, at the very beginning, we really made a push to get press out to kind of announce ourselves and to get a good website and to kind of explain to people what we were about. And after that, we really didn't have a lot of publicity. We didn't release screenshots, really. We didn't make any videos or trailers. We just kind of put our heads to the floor and kept working. And in a lot of ways, that worked against us because people didn't know what we were about or if we were going to be successful or how good we were or anything. And sometimes our paranoid attitudes about sharing large chunks of missions worked against us because, a lot of people when they contributed small amounts to the project had to accept on faith that we were going to be done and we were going to ship, and that we were not always smart in that way.
Well, but even the voice actors, we kept them, we'd give them lines to even win, I think, to some degree. She'd have these lines, but she didn't really understand the context a lot of times.
Yeah.
Of why Zaya is saying this or whatever, and we tried to be real careful about that. And it was also, it would have been very difficult to give context to all the variety of people that were contributing things.
Yeah, for the voice actors, I think the biggest thing was giving them plot summaries and showing them occasionally, like showing them screenshots or whatever. But mainly, I think they had faith in the story and some of them we knew personally. So like Paul and New Horizon, we knew personally, so they had a lot of faith that we'd deliver.
Well, and that's the thing that we hoped originally, is that if we could attract designers like Gon Chong or yourself or Gecko and just some guys that people kind of knew in the community that were active in the editing forums and things like that other people would see, that they would lend credibility to the project
to us, and then other people would come on board,
right, and be willing to accept on faith that I don't know exactly what they're doing with this, but Gon Chong's working on it, so I'm sure it's going to be good,
must be good.
or whatever, and that worked with some people,
Yeah, the hardest part was really the times in the middle, like between our first announcement and when we came out with new screenshots and a trailer and so forth. Avalon actually pushed for a trailer for a really long time, and I kept discouraging him because I knew a trailer was a lot of work, and I was really concerned about getting all the cutscenes done.
Yeah, the graphics team was struggling, man.
Yeah, but once we learned that the cutscenes were more or less in the bag, we were like, all right, we got to do a trailer, and then we did a trailer, which was great. And then everybody started coming to knock on our door, and it was easy to get support right for the very last year, I think, that we worked on it.
After the trailer. Well, that's the thing that's so funny is, even some of these names you're bringing up, it's like, to me, I've forgotten some of the people that started out with us, and some of the guys at the end. It's like there were so many, and there was so much going on at the time. I didn't really, I wasn't really keeping up anymore with anything other than just what was going on with plot, and you were kind of dealing with graphics and audio and all that, and I was almost completely unaware of what, other than you just telling me, hey, we're getting it done. Okay, if he says we're getting it done, we're getting it done. I mean,
stand by for your biweekly update.
Right. I mean, there wasn't time to download everything on it, because especially at the end, it was just coming on, really fast there at the end, and it was more than I could keep up with.
Yeah.
but you know, it turned out well, and it was just nice that we were able to include as many people as we did. You know, that we did fulfill that vision. I think of it being a community project.
I mean, I think we say this on our website, but we had over 60 contributors. I think the final credits list was 61, and I think there was a couple of people that really helped us out at the end who didn't make it into the credits or who didn't make it, as high up on the list as they should have, just because we were rushed for time and we couldn't redo the credits movie, or the cutscene team couldn't redo the credits movie. So really, I mean, I think when all said and done, we probably had about 65 people, which is enormous for a mod project.
Oh yeah.
So it was a lot of management difficulties, a lot of angst,
a lot of administrative issues.
Yes, a lot of ennui. But anyway, like one of the things that I think we tried to do once we got into our groove was really establish a core group of people who are going to be around for the long haul, and that was, us, the Weeds, in Avalon, and Duncan and Gonchong, Paul Fox, Adink, and Crimson,
Valletta,
Toolhead, just maybe 10 people who are really going to be really dedicated to the end, and then everybody else. What we really wanted to do was to allow people to contribute in spurts, basically, to give us like a ton of energy and crank out a few like really good resources, and then choose to either stay on or go their separate ways. Because we really got into problems when we expected people to stick around for months at a time, because that really wasn't fair. We really wanted people to be able to contribute resources and then move on.
And the people that were involved for that long haul, I think we counted at one time, there had been of that group of people, there had been like 4 babies born, 3 divorces, six marriages.
Births,
I mean,
deaths,
some of us moved 2 or 3 times during the crime. I mean, I moved 3 times and had a kid over the course of this thing. So it really was just such a huge part of our lives for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And everybody, I'm sure if the other guys could be here, they could all tell stories about, the struggles that they had to overcome in real life just to be able to commit the time that it took to do it. A lot of late nights and angry wives and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But,
so here we are at the end. We're in the library. One of the concerns I had actually with this design was making sure that players knew where the library was. There's 2 entrances. There's one at the bottom of the cathedral, but that's kind of tucked away in a corner. And then there's another one which is via the building in the back of the cathedral over to the side. And we put plaques out with clear labels on them, but ultimately it was the geometry that had to call attention to itself, and maybe we could have done a little bit better job with that. But, hopefully between multiple entrances and having it labeled on our metagame map and seeing where the objectives take you, that players would figure it out and would eventually explore down here.
Well, and also having, a lot of this with I think designing Thief missions too is having faith that you're dealing with gamers that enjoy exploring. They enjoy trying to get into places where they're really not supposed to go, and so if it's there, they can find it, kind of a thing. It may take them a little longer, but you expect Thief fans to have a little bit longer, actually much longer attention span than people that are normal used to conventional first person games.
And that's one of the reasons why Thief doesn't sell better,
right?
Because it relies on the kind of fun that inherently requires I think a different kind of mentality than people who play shooters and action games.
Right, but it does allow, when you're designing stuff, and even in the writing process, which I can speak more to, it allows you a lot more freedom to, you can develop themes over an extended period of time. It's not microwave mentality, in terms of plot and character development. You can develop a story over 3 or 4 missions, or even a subplot you can carry on for a long time. And again, it's just, that's one of the reasons I think those of us who are big fans of this game love it so much, is because it's that attention to detail that sucks us in and really immerses us in the world. And it makes it really nice when you're doing a long campaign like this to have people are going to play it that have that kind of attention span.